Thank you so much, Scott, for joining us today on this week's Wisdom Wednesdays. I'm so excited to have you on. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh my gosh, Ashley, the pleasure's mine. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm not actually at Dodger Stadium. I only wish I was all the time, but I will be soon when the season starts.
Wow,
So happy to be here.
I love MLB games. I spent the last 7 years in DC going to the Nats games, and they are so much fun. It's like the perfect atmosphere for me. I'm a big sports fan. I've
Yeah,
played sports my entire life, but there's something about baseball games where it's just like you get to go. I don't even sit in my seats half the time. I just
you're
go,
walking around. Yeah.
walk around, and people watch, and it's just such a fun atmosphere in the summer, and it's awesome. I love
It
any MLB game.
it is my favorite thing. My wife and I actually went to a Nats game once in Washington. We were impressed with two things. The ease, it's right there off the subway,
Yes.
and the food. Pretty phenomenal.
Yeah. So we could talk about
All day. Yeah.
all day long, but before we go ahead, I will have you introduce yourself.
Well, thanks, Ashley. So I'm Scott Weintraub, and I work for Mortgage Quality Management and Research, and we ask everyone to call us MQMR because it's easier and faster. So I am the VP of Compliance at MQMR. MQMR helps our clients in really three main areas. Risk management, which, as you know, can come from anywhere, internal audit, and compliance. And obviously, when we talk about compliance in the mortgage industry, that's a topic that we could talk about even longer than baseball. It takes so long because there's so many different laws and regulations that govern mortgage lending. And, so any lender or servicer that we think about could use some help in some or many of those areas. And that's the help that we provide and the value that we add for our clients. And then I specifically not only help us try to help our clients in all aspects of compliance with lending and servicing.
That's great. I know compliance is one of those things that's like super sexy to talk about, right? I mean, everybody is interested in compliance. Now, it's one of those things that I feel like is so incredibly important in the industry, but is not forefront, especially with the young professionals. And as the Impact Young Professionals Network group at MBA, and myself as a young professional, and just my history of starting in as a processor and the origination space, it was you always took like compliance classes and you have to remain compliant, and there's always that word, right? But nobody like really dives deep into what that means, like kind of behind the scenes, or like what that means, like you said, as a fair lending perspective. Like we all take the compliance courses and think we're doing everything that we can, and maybe as the operations staff we are, but why do you think, from your perspective, it's so important for young professionals specifically to be interested and engaged in compliance and what their company is doing on the compliance level?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ashley. And I think, by the way, a good point for me to point out how happy I am to be part of this conversation, even though I am much older than the Young Professionals Group. So thank you for having me, despite that being the case. But there's a couple of really important reasons why, if you're a young professional in the mortgage industry, or maybe you're not quite so young, but you're new or new-ish to the mortgage industry, why compliance is really important for you to learn as much about as you can, even if you don't actually work in a compliance department. Now, for me, I spent my whole career working in legal and compliance. If I didn't, I started out as a processor or loan officer or something like that, I would wish that someone would be having the conversation with me that you and I are having right now. So there's a couple reasons. One is compliance is not role dependent, and it's not something that can just be left to a compliance department. So, for example, if you're a loan officer or a processor or an underwriter or a closer or whatever your role might be, one cannot have the mindset that says, I can go and do whatever I want, and if I mess something up, someone in compliance will fix it. There are several reasons why that's not the case, including, for example, that no one looks at every loan, or they certainly don't look at them all before the loan funds, right? Or before an issue happens that could cause a big problem. right? And so if everyone had that attitude, then it wouldn't be a problem with one loan, it would be a problem systemically at the organization. So in other words, when you're a loan officer, you're taking an application with the consumer. So first of all, you're the one that has the direct relationship with that applicant that will hopefully become a borrower. And there are all kinds of rules that govern just that piece, right? Um, and if you're a processor or an underwriter and you're an underwriter and let's say you're denying an application, there's a lot of rules associated with that too. Um, and whether you're closing or funding a loan, making sure that the fees are accurate, that they're not out of tolerance, and all of these things that people may have heard, but not really know a lot about. And maybe some of our listeners are wondering if it's something they have to know
Mhm.
a lot about. And they do. Number one, if you don't, and if you had that mindset, I can do what I want and someone else will fix it, that may not always be true. But B, if that is true, even if it does get fixed, that would be a much greater time and resources and effort expended down the line and would likely make that loan take a lot longer to fund, or maybe it wouldn't fund because that borrower would get frustrated and go someplace else. So that's one big reason that no matter what your role is within the organization, there are compliance rules that have to be followed, and the consequences for not doing it can be enormous, right? For that individual loan and for the company as a whole.
Right.
Secondly, for anyone looking for a career path in the mortgage industry, no matter what that is, on the sales side or on the operations side, or if you want to be CEO of your mortgage lending company someday, in any of those paths, the more you know about compliance, the more successful that career path will be. Because again, it seeps into every department at the company. And I want to sort of end this answer with where you started when you said that people don't usually use compliance and sexy in the same sentence. As
Mhm.
someone who's made a career of it, I would say that's sad but true, or maybe only I would use it in the same sentence and no one would believe me. But it's actually more true than we might think, because I think a lot of people actually have the opinion that compliance is a way to stop loans from funding, or it's a way to have someone at the company, like if it was me, to be some kind of police officer to say no and to
Right.
stop things. I think it's quite the opposite. I think a compliant mortgage lender can get loans funded more quickly, more efficiently, more compliantly, and that allows your company to have a good reputation, to get more loans in the door because people have a good experience with you. You're not ripping the borrower off, you're not setting them up to fail with a loan they can't pay back, and it's being done more quickly because your compliance tools and resources are in place. And so overall, you're a better company for people to work with. And as we know, people talk, and they're going to say, you should go to your company because they treat you right and you don't have to wait 8 months to get a loan.
Right. I love that. I think so. One of the things, going back to what you said earlier with looking at compliance in the different roles, it's not role specific or it's not
Yeah.
like completely role based. One of the things that I wholeheartedly wish for people, especially in like operations or servicing or anything that's kind of on that front line of loan officers all the way to closers to sellers to et cetera down the line of
Yeah.
a whole loan, the life cycle of a loan. I wish nothing more but for to have you cross-trained and cross-trained
Mhm.
to the roles around you, because I always come back to the why behind your job and the why behind why you do things. And I always think if you have more of an in-depth understanding of, let's say, where I started as a processor,
Yep.
if I'm being a processor and I know exactly what the closers do, I will be able to not only set them up for success because I'm putting together a more complete file because I know exactly what they need, or even the underwriters, for example, but it creates a better experience for the borrower or the member or the customer that you're front facing and you're speaking to, because you can explain the why behind why I'm asking for things. And so the same thing with compliance. If you're it's the why. I feel like compliance is all of the why behind why we're asking for things and why we can and can't do things. And so if we really wholeheartedly understand the why and why compliance or and how compliance plays a role in that, I feel like it will make everybody's lives easier and the loans will close faster and people will have a much better experience from A to Z in the loan life cycle.
Ashley, this was so fun for me. Thanks so much for having me.
That sounds great. Well, thank you, Scott. I really appreciate you being part of Wisdom Wednesdays.
Thanks so much, Ashley.
Thanks.